Good day. For this session, we are going to discuss about the second part of fraud and forensic auditing. So basically, these parts have been mentioned already by Ms. Duran in part one, and you have to make sure that you have watched that part already. So allow me to have a run through. This will be basically a review of those parts mentioned because if you can notice with the first part, I did not like add some input. So allow me to do that in the second session. What is fraud? Fraud is defined under ISACA Guidance 30 about irregularities and illegal acts, that it is any act involving the use of deception to obtain an illegal advantage. I like this definition because it is emphasized here that it is an act, of course, so it is an action involving the use of deception. So there is really an intention to deceive or mislead others so that the perpetrator, also known as the fraudster, that's the term used here, will be able to obtain an illegal advantage. Illegal on the sense that it is a violation of the law, but it can be irregular, in which that is an intentional violation of the corporate rules and regulations. So that is our basis here, and that's what we have known so far. And then after that, we have the question why fraud occurs. Fraud occurs because of three factors. And that's why we have here the so-called fraud triangle. In the fraud triangle, we have three factors that we have to know. We have pressure, also known as incentive. So what is the reason why you are committing the fraud? What pushed you, what moved you to commit fraud? And that's the pressure or the incentive. What will you get should you commit fraud? Then we have the opportunity. The opportunity is our goal. And then, of course, that's actually what is presented there. That causes privilege for us to commit fraud. We have the pressure, we have something or factor that pushes us to commit fraud. And there is that situation that gives us the moment to seize it. So that is the opportunity or the opportune moment. While rationalization is our thinking, our mindset about fraud, in that we are going to think that it is not only us who commit fraud, there are also others who commit fraud. We would be saying that, oh, it's not only me in this organization who did this thing or such. And that's why we are going to commit fraud then in organizations or businesses. These three factors, of course, will be there or present for us to say or for us to be able to really perpetrate fraud. These are the major fraud studies which are actually discussed already by Duran well in the previously issued video. So make sure to check that out. The cost studies, the Committee on Sponsoring Organizations of the Tradeway Commission studies in 1987 and 1999. We also have the KPMG. This is an auditing firm fraud study in 1998 and the 2002 Wells report. So well, to summarize there, I would like to say that it has been found out that the more senior, meaning the more a person or employee stays in the company, the higher the position, the greater the age, males have more tendencies to commit fraud, the more the tendency that such person would commit fraud. Of course, if more senior, you know well about the run around or the walkthroughs in the organization. You know the origin and disposition of certain transaction or even the document. So that's the reason why it would be easier for one to commit fraud or you to commit fraud. The greater the age, then the more mature you are, the more the tendencies that you'll be committing fraud. The more educated you are, because the more the tendency that you'll be up in the corporate ladder, then the more the tendencies that you will commit fraud. So those are just some highlights. And sad to say, males have the more tendencies of committing fraud than the females. Then to continue, characteristics of fraud. This big, or this is just so big, $600 billion in 2002. Adjusted for inflation, that's too much nowadays. These are the problematic industries, the computer. So more tendencies fraud to occur in computer industries. So there can be misappropriation of assets. And of course, this is IT based. So there could be greater chances of fraud to occur. We have manufacturing, misappropriation of assets also in terms of inventories, and the financial services. So money, more on money items like banks, life insurance companies, and so on. Although not all, but we can say that the more the tendencies that fraud will occur or occurred actually. Then what are the three categories of fraud? 10-4, we can see that actually on our PDF files. So we have to know that we have the asset misappropriation, which is constituting the highest of the cases. Corruption is 12.8%, while the fraudulent FSS 5.1%, but the highest dollar amount. So we can say that in terms of cases, asset misappropriation has the highest number of cases, but for fraudulent financial statements, it has the highest dollar amount. Why so? If you say asset misappropriation, we're talking here about cash, inventories, etc. Asset misappropriation can occur or happen from the bottom of the organization up to the highest level of the organization. And it's possible that collusion, meaning connivance between two or more employees of different levels, not necessarily the same levels, can happen. So that's why asset misappropriation can occur more or a lot as compared with the other categories of fraud. But if we say fraudulent financial statements, there are only few, like who constitutes, who will be the persons approving and presenting the financial statement, signing for approval. This will be the people at the top, of course. So only few of them have access to the financial statements and the report. So that's why they will constitute the least in terms of number of cases, but in terms of the figures, the values, then such will be the highest because it will be easier for only few groups to be able to commit fraud easily than the others, which are of many or various levels. All right. Then corruption is exercising influence to be able to get something. That's the essence of what corruption is. Now, what would be the responsibilities to detect fraud? On corporate level, we should have a positive security model, or also known as the proactive security model, wherein we have to do the PDCA cycle. Although it's not mentioned here in the chapter, plan, do, check, act cycle. We plan for the things that's going to happen in the company, prepare for the eventualities, then we are going to do, to implement, perform, we check for the variances, like what are the areas wherein it's favorable to us or unfavorable. If favorable, then we're going to remain that, but we are going to add more. If unfavorable, then we are going to change for the better. And to, of course, the act. So we have to improve the next cycle. And again, planning, doing, checking, acting. So plan, do, check, act cycle. That's being positive or proactive. We have to constitute or institute the corporate fraud policy. It should be that there is an ethical tone at the top. Remember the 5 interrelated components of the internal control, in which the first one is control environment, that those at the top should set the tone. Wherein supposedly those at the top should be able to influence those at the bottom, because it's very awkward that those who set up the plus policies are the very persons who violated such. Then policies on computer use and abuse. So we have to know there is a limit as to the use so as not to abuse. And also the network security. We have to protect the networks and the accesses to the company's private and confidential resources, especially the sensitive ones. Okay. Then We have SAS 99. This has been discussed actually by Duran, that this will talk about the fraud triangle, and in which the audit team would have to consider that. We have mentioned already pressure, opportunity, and rationalization factors. These are the three, or those are the three factors, POR. Professional skepticism means that the auditor must exercise the attitude of assuming that management is not really honest, nor has an unquestioned honesty. So management is basically not assumed to be really like having the dishonesty, like 100% dishonest, or has an unquestionable or unquestioned honesty. So 100% honesty, meaning it's something in between the two. So that's something as professionally skeptic or skeptic. So we are like analyzing the things and the documents which are furnished to us. If we do the audit, let's say the prospective client provides to us certain documents or evidences, but then we do not necessarily believe in everything that's given to us. So we are going to analyze and think about it properly. Also, there should have been expanded team discussions, because in audits, we've said in chapter 2 that rarely we do the audits in isolation. We should be in groups. We are in groups. So we are going to discuss among themselves or ourselves as to how the audit should be done. And there has to be brainstorming or giving of certain ideas or inputs. Then we also have revenue recognition as to how to recognize the revenue, because this was the case in Sarbanes-Oxley Act, in which that was the response of Enron scandal, because Enron bloated the revenues to the point that they are able to really hide their losses. They were already experiencing substantial losses in many years, but because of bloating the revenues, so experiences wise, the profits would be higher. And that's the reason wherein revenue will be, of course, investigated, because that's one thing that a lot of companies have been able to really cook their respective financial statements. If you say cook, you're exercising the so-called creative accounting. Creative accounting means fraudulent accounting. Then technology, of course, will play part and big major part in the preparation of financial statements, especially in CIS environment or IT environment. Then, as said, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act was the response to the scandal, in which at that point, Enron was really the big or large and one of the largest corporations in the United States. And Arthur Andersen was the number one auditing firm. But because of that, like who in one day, everything, the glitters were just being thrown anywhere, thrown outside the window. It's because it's so difficult to build a reputation, but so easy to destroy one. And this is the reason that there is now the PCAOB, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, just to be complete, established by this law. Of course, that's the arm of Securities and Exchange Commission in US. And then increased audit committee responsibilities, which are components of or parts of the board of directors, but then they are not holding any line functions. And that any audit functions like the audit, whether that's internal or external, will be communicated to them, because they are not biased in any way to the operations of the business. Specifically prohibited activities has been mentioned by Duran, that there are non-audit services which are not allowed to be performed if companies are also performing audit, because in that case, there will be conflicts of interest. For example, you are doing the compilation, but also you are doing the auditing of those compiled financial statements. For sure, you are going to provide the best opinion because you are the very ones doing the compilation. Then also there will be criminal sanctions, and if ever there will be those who will be providing insider information about those companies in which the management or the board of directors or any employee or staff of the corporations are doing criminal actions, so somebody will have to disclose them. Then these people who are doing the disclosures are called whistleblowers. They have to be protected under the law. to encourage them, of course. Then forensic auditing is doing or acting like detectives or policemen, in which the auditors will be investigating known or suspected fraud or suspected. Computer forensics will be the use of computer technology to investigate fraud. Just like if you have seen in movies wherein computers are being used to analyze certain transactions and then fraud could be uncovered later on. In conducting the forensic investigation, of course, we have to gather evidence to support our respective claims. Rules of evidence must be carefully followed. If you are looking for the civil cases and the civil sanctions, normally that's mere preponderance of evidence. If you say mere preponderance of evidence, meaning we just need to secure more evidences, which are, of course, palpable or plausible in the courts, and we'll be able to win the cases. But then if that is criminal act, we need to have evidences beyond reasonable doubt. In the source, that has been said like 95%, but it depends upon the situation. Chain of custody, like who takes care of something should be there. Interviewing the personnel could be the person alleged to commit fraud or committed the fraud, or the witnesses. Then invigilation is doing any act of imposing strict internal controls to the point that fraud will not happen. Indirect methods of proof wherein to gather evidence, it would be to look into other factors than just seizing whatever evidences that are really at hand or on hand of certain perpetrators who could be alleged to have done the fraud or alleged fraudsters. So it could be like investigating the lifestyle of employees, like their respective assets that they have gathered and etc., like their payroll or pay slips and other sources of income. Then in prosecution or in, for example, deciding as to whether a person really has committed a fraud. So there must be the chain of custody that should be around as to who is responsible. Then there should be four elements that will have to be taken note as to whether fraud exists. So one is misrepresentation of a material fact. What is material or reasonable will depend upon one case over the other. There's really an intent to defraud or deceive others, and the reliance should be justifiable that the victim must have relied on the misrepresentation. So because of the person or the fraudster or the criminal doing the act, in that the victim really believed on that act and it resulted to an injury to that person, could be or must be quantifiable in economic terms, for example, lost wages or lost revenues. Then these are the tools that can be used by forensic accountants in doing their respective forensic audit jobs. So they can be acting like, if you have seen Inspector Gadget as an anime, so wherein he has actually a lot of tools being used in investigation. This can also be this case of the so-called forensic auditor. So using of screwdriver and pliers, because it's possible that there will be computers that are to be opened and etc. And then also the software which are used actually. So this imaging software, hash calculation utility, and many more softwares being used for computer forensics. All right, so that's it, or the end of our summaries for this particular chapter. I'm hoping that you were able to gather some information about this one. Thank you very much, and God bless us all.